Hey everybody, this is John Ernest, also known as Internet Janitor, and I'm here with some of my friends to welcome you to the sixth annual Octo Jam. This is a game jam where we all build software for the Chip 8 platform, a virtual game console from the 1970s. Joining me today, we've got John Turp,
Hey.
Everdread,
It's me, Everdread. Wow.
and Master Goffrin.
Hello.
Let's jump right into the games.
All right, so I'm driving the ship here, and our first game here, we're going to be playing...
Navigate a ship.
All right, I am the navigator for this ship. All right, lights out.
Okay, Lights Out. This is a game by a newcomer this year, Tobias Langhoff. And this is an implementation of the classic Tiger Electronics game. This was submitted along with a really great README manual that is done to match the style of the zines that people made around the time that Chip 8 was originally popularized.
Oh, that's awesome.
So you should definitely check that out. It's fantastic. And this version of Lights Out is, I think that his README says that it's an edition of Lights Out called Mini Lights Out. But the twist is that it's a toroidal version of Lights Out.
I have to admit, I'm not familiar with lights out.
So the idea in Lights Out is it's a puzzle game where there are certain lights that are on. Those are the ones that are the filled squares here. And whenever you press one, it toggles all of the orthogonally neighboring lights. And the goal is to turn them all off.
Off, okay. I was turning them all on.
Well, I mean, if you can
And
get
you
them
can
all
only
on.
press the ones that are currently on.
Okay, I had them flipped.
But so it also wraps around the edges. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. So in some versions of Lights Out, I think the original one was a 5x5, and it did not wrap around the edges. But in this version of the game, it's toroidal. And I believe that the difference between these is that one of those versions of the rules ensures that a random initial ordering of things will be solvable, and one of them does not. I think that in this version, all of the configurations are solvable. So
Does this have a level list, or is this randomly generating at the start?
This is randomly generated levels, and that's an intentional, choice to go with a rule set that allows you to randomize the levels.
Yep, that makes sense.
And they'll be winnable.
So what's the general strategy for this? Because like this is reminding me a lot of sliding block puzzles almost. And,
It's a class. It's definitely a type of puzzle that you see very often included in an adventure game.
The one other thing
Yeah,
that I'd say is a little bit notable about this is that this is one of 4 entries that this year that conform to the classic Chip 8 system requirements. This is running at a very slow 7 cycles per frame, which is pretty doable when you're doing a non-action oriented puzzle game like this. And so this would work on real hardware. I'll make a point of highlighting that on other games we play today that have that property. I think that's pretty much all there is to see with this.
Okay, and then we'll move on to our next game, which is Rule 30 Improved, and IJ, you're definitely going to need to help us out with this one, yeah.
Okay, so this is another implementation of a cellular automaton. The controls that you've got here are on the Octo keyboard mapping. 2 and S let you move a little cursor around, and pressing W toggles a pixel. So what you can do is... So
unfortunately, I cannot bring up the Octo keyboard with how we have this set up right now. But I can look at the helpful...
Well, I'm describing the
Yeah.
keyboard.
Lights Out has a nice has a really nice layout of the Octo keyboard that I'm gonna use to map it to my hardware keyboard real quick here.
Okay. But so anyway, the idea in a cellular automaton is you have, in this case, a two-dimensional pattern that is built by considering a one-dimensional strip of cells that are on or off, and then you iteratively generate the next strip by applying rules to the previous strip, and so on. And there's a lot of interesting mathematical theory behind these things. They can be used as a model of doing general computation. So this particular program is one of two programs that were submitted this year by the user Verisimilitude. And these were programs that were not written with Octo. This was developed using a meta assembler that he's been tinkering with for a while. So there's a very detailed write-up on this and his other program. And so if you're interested in the way that this goes together and more about how it works internally, I would encourage you to go ahead and read the write-up that he linked in his itch page.
Yeah, I'm taking a look at it now. It looks, yeah, I really like the code diagrams.
Mm-hmm. So there isn't a ton for us to show on the stream, aside from the fact that it makes cool-looking patterns. But there's a lot more to read for background information about this one.
All right, our next game is Flutter by Tomar. Let's see.
Yes, this is one of 3 submissions built by Tomar. He was playing around with exochip instructions here, and it's a pretty simple game, but I think it actually works pretty well. The idea is that you're a butterfly and you're trying to harvest nectar from a series of flowers. If you don't feed enough, then your energy levels just fall and fall and fall, and eventually you'll lose. And as your energy levels get higher, you move faster and faster. The goal is to hit the centers of those flowers. It's a little bit tricky, actually. The hit detection is somewhat finicky and exacting.
It looks like it's a pixel match, and if you're going faster and faster, you'd actually skip over.
Yeah,
less time to actually hit.
It does seem like it may be possible to move fast enough to sort of skip over the flowers when I was playing this.
I found that if you just float up and down,
it makes it a little bit easier, but it's still possible to miss the flowers.
I like the floating movement of the butterfly. Seems very smooth for a chip 8 game.
It definitely feels like I'm drifting around, being buffeted by wind. So it feels like you're a butterfly as opposed to, just sort of some, arbitrary object, I guess.
Yeah, one that doesn't have physicality to it.
The visual style is really nice as well. I think that this game looks and reads very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if the flowers are a little bit larger. And the other thing, I guess there's an infinite amount. If you could just stay on the flower, you'd get as much energy as you could. So some sort of, I don't know if there should be a limit to how much a flower can actually give you resource. It definitely looks I definitely like the aesthetic with it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of how you could support it to make it a little bit stronger. So it seems like the flowers now are less common. Is that a normal progression thing, or is it just random?
It's kind of just a capricious random number generator, which is probably the thing that detracts the most from my enjoyment of this game, because you can get these long dry spells and then situations where there's a ton of flowers in rapid succession. And it's the combination of when you don't get any flowers, you slow down.
Yeah.
And then you get this really long pause in the action. But otherwise, I do find it fairly fun.
Like this kind of game design does lend itself to actually having, you could make levels for this game.
Yeah, definitely. I think that if the levels were deterministic, then it could be pretty interesting to try to compete for high scores or something like that. You know, you could flesh it out a little bit more. You could have additional maybe. It seems like a really good start to a game. So I'd be very interested if Tom could be convinced to take another pass at this next year.
I'd like to see some sort of antagonistic, like some sort of fake flower, some sort of like mean frog that wants to like get you with his tongue, like something like
yeah, that would be interesting.
that would just be another little step of like a little extra avoidance. And it doesn't have to be an instant kill. It could just be like it reduces your energy, but it seems pretty easy to go on forever in this one, which isn't bad. But having
you can lose, but I don't think that there's any way to win, really.
Or I mean, that's like normal for
True
butterflies.
life, yeah, that's very true. Life.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's about what we've got to say about this one.
Excellent.
Let's move on.
All right, next game here is An Evening to Die For.
Okay, so this game is a little bit involved. It's an exochip game, and the general idea was that I was trying to create an adaptation of an old DOS game that I was very fond of called Sleuth.
Nice transition.
Yeah, nice. I like the effects.
The main thing that I was trying to do with this was make it feel really cinematic and atmospheric. So you can advance dialogue by hitting space.
Gotcha.
Oh no. Professor Puce. What a mess.
So Clue-ish?
Yeah, it's very Clue inspired.
All right, so what are we doing here?
So to investigate, you're going to choose a room that you want to go to, and then you can snoop around, talk to people, figure out what their alibis were.
The
if you just
feels quite good.
Yeah, if you're just anywhere in the room and you hit space, then if you're close enough to an object, then it'll just interact with it. And if you're further away, it shows you things that are nearby.
Yeah.
I like this. Very good reference to 50 Cent.
And so there's some things that are like meaningful to the mystery, and there are some things that are just sort of there for flavor. And some aspects of the stuff that you find, the descriptions that you'll hear, are all randomized from game to game, so it's a little bit different every time.
I really like what you did with because this is clearly an exochip game, but you're being very choosy about how you use your colors.
Yeah. So with exochip, you have the ability to make games that use 4 colors, and in this game, I strictly use 3. Almost the entire thing is in black and white, and then there are little bits of the use of red when I want to make something stand out.
I thought you were trying to find the word monochrome.
Yeah, I like how the holding space to reveal objects in the environment is quite well done.
Yeah, I was really worried about accidentally making it into some kind of horrible pixel hunt. Because the initial design that I had for this, I was going to have it show an indicator or something when you're near stuff. But when I started experimenting with that, it was really frustrating.
So you'd have to scour the entire room, I suppose.
Yeah, and in this case, you do have to wander around a little space a few times, but the threshold on it is generous enough that it feels more like you're exploring than that you have to, scrub the walls with your face or something.
Yeah. Plus, if it would take out of your hot loop, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazing way to, not only is it better than having objects in the environment, but it's just a good way to get around the limitations of the hardware.
Right.
So do you have like essentially regions, and only in any particular region there'd only be one thing that you'd essentially have as an object to interact?
Yeah, so every room has a bunch of regions defined for it that are like, if there's an item, it goes here. If there are descriptive things, then they could go in these positions. If there are NPCs standing there at a given time, then there are slots that they can go into. So, so that way I can ensure that you don't have problems with, you know, a bunch of NPCs standing on top of one another, or, you know, other really weird stuff like that.
I was with Professor Puce in the pantry, but it seems this person was with Professor Puce in the library.
Could be at different times, or is that actually a conflict?
If there are NPCs that disagree about what they were doing, then that's suggestive. Basically the main things that you want to accomplish in this game in order to succeed are that's where the chalk outline is, of course. So you need to find a murder weapon, which is going to involve first finding your spyglass so that you can closely examine things.
Wait a minute.
And then you also need to figure out which NPC was lying or has an alibi that doesn't lie. There are a number of different ways that the game can end, depending on where you go. There are several ways that you could be incorrect about your detective work. And as you may have noticed, as you're going through these rooms and interacting, at one point, a message that said that the killer is growing suspicious of your investigation. All of the things that you do when you interview people and pick up objects and things like that are slightly increasing the degree to which the murderer is suspicious of you. And if you get that level high enough, then they're actually going to start trying to stalk you and kill you. So you're just going to make a wild guess?
This guy. No, it's not a wild guess, because this guy has the most inconsistencies in his alibi.
Well, you didn't find a murder weapon, so I don't think this is going to work out too well for you.
Oh.
Right, because that's part, like, if you think about I guess it's too late to not pick somebody.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No backing out.
But actually, the best part is what I will say is that the NPC that laughs at you in that section is the person who was the real murderer.
So
you got it right, but you didn't have enough information to pin it on it.
You fool! Do you just need the murder weapon? So if you had found that, would that have worked out?
No, you need both.
Okay.
Yeah, because you need to know who did it, with what, where, and where, but you know where it happened.
Man,
I guess.
Yeah.
IJ, this is excellent. This is really good.
Impressive.
Thank you. I'm really pleased with it. I went on vacation and spent about a week just tinkering with pieces of this, and my main goal for it was to. Oh, there you go. That's really important. So now that you have the spyglass, when you find items that have those icons to them,
Getting a notebook. Okay.
good idea.
We're gonna solve this. We're gonna finish this game.
Like a real sleuth.
So
Feldgrau says
SF was in the BR with
PP.
Ooh.
That's definitely an interesting place to spend your evening with someone.
So we got the doctor. All alone, so big A. In the drawing room. The doctor and the doctor.
Mm.
MG.
So the actual gameplay of it is pretty simple and straightforward. Like once you really figure out all of the aspects of the way that the systems work, but to some extent, the figuring out how to do everything is part of the fun. In Sleuth, I remember I played that game like dozens of times before I figured out like what you even need to do. But I tried to make sure that there was enough flavor and atmosphere that the stumbling around part was a little bit fun in and of itself.
Right, yeah. I'm just looking up what Sleuth was actually like. And honestly, this has a lot more graphics going on than Sleuth does.
Yeah, the original Sleuth was just an anti-graphics thing, and it used a text-based parser, which had a few advantages over this system because it was a little bit more versatile in the ways that you could do detective work. I had to streamline the controls a lot more to make it playable on chip 8. And I think it makes it more accessible, but oh, that's interesting.
So we have an inconsistency already.
Mhm.
So EP says they were in the kitchen with Lord of Viridian, LV. But SF says they were in the bathroom with PP.
Bric-a-brac.
I'm gonna draw a little line between the two now. So I have suspects here. So suspects, SF, and PP. Doesn't seem to be much here.
Yeah. It doesn't look like there's anything important in that room this time around. The secret rooms can appear in a variety of different places throughout the house, and occasionally they're totally vital. It all depends on how the setup of the mystery goes.
So I guess you're looking for...
Oh, wait.
Is that corroborating?
So that was with use in the kitchen. So let's see. Hey, the font might have thrown me off there. PP might have said that same thing.
Yeah, I think PP did say that there was Lady Viridian in the kitchen.
I read it as Lord Viridian.
So
is there a lady and a lord?
No.
Or is it just, okay.
They're all distinct. Last
right,
name.
so
Because I thought
Lord Viridian.
So that's corroborated. So I'm going to cross PP off this list and say SF here. Pretty spooky.
Bad seed.
So if you believe that you've figured out who the murderer is, then what you mainly need to concern yourself with is finding the murder weapon. And you've already gotten the spyglass, so you're on the right track there.
Is there any sort of like hint system for like getting them a little bit faster to get to the location that would have the item?
Not really, aside from doing the investigation. Although, as you get used to the maps, you will know where to look for things. Like again, it's kind of the problem of I can only have so much variety in this game. I should note that this uses all but about 200 bytes of the code space that I have available. So I wanted to have more elaborate systems behind this, but there's only so much I can do in terms of changing stuff up.
Yep.
So as you play it a few times, you start to see. Oh shit!
There's traces of blood.
All right, let's find where the murder happened.
Well, isn't it always the same, or does that change too?
It wasn't.
That changes from game to game. Oh. But the body doesn't move, whereas NPCs do.
Yeah, it's definitely SF with a fire poker.
Okay.
So where's the body? Does it tell you?
There are ways to tell, but
there it is.
Yep, in
the corner. That's me in the corner.
That's me in the spotlight. SF again.
He's a bad seed. Look at those eyes.
All
Get
right,
ready.
so I'm gonna go reread the instructions. So space attacks, left and right keys move, up blocks.
Wait, what?
I really wish that I could have done spoiler tags in the
Well,
in the documentation.
I didn't think it
What?
would. It says in the unlikely event it should come to fisticuffs. I think that covers it pretty well. Look,
What?
I'm a pro detective.
Yeah, you have to do this stuff.
Listen, I've played Disco Elysium.
I did not know about this. Holy crap! Are you
What?
kidding?
Don't get too excited.
Oh, I'm excited. On God! Woo!
This game is not hard. I just want to be clear. It's mainly there so that you have something resembling a climax.
Yeah, we're in the net.
That's so good.
Trounced.
Soundly
Beautiful.
trounced.
Well done, John.
Another successful case. That was
Detective.
very, very good. I thoroughly enjoyed that.
That's extremely impressive.
It is possible to get a final rank of sleuth, but it involves a significant component of luck and basically doing everything perfectly.
Is it just pretty much how much time you took to get to that point?
It's the degree of suspicion you have invoked. So it's kind of all of the actions that you've taken build up to it. So what do you think?
Yeah,
Very, very good.
Oh yeah, that's. I feel like that game could get quite a bit of traction because it has this wonderful retro feel to it.
Yeah, I think the only thing going back to saying like if there's signposting, the idea of like some of the conversations of people, if they have an extra screen of text, if there's possibly room for that, where it's like they might say a nothing comment, but they might say something that's actually specific to the case of like, and it seemed like I heard strange noises or something like that.
Right.
That help give a chance for like, oh, you hit one room, but it gives you a lead to another. That sort of sequence, especially if it also goes to like, oh, this person. If you can tie to a person as well of a chain of movements, that could be very strong.
Right. I'll just leave it that I'm very interested in doing another on this, and maybe doing something that's not written in chip 8 and that has a similarly kind of reserved style to it, but is a little bit fancier graphically and a lot more complicated mechanically, so that there's more replay value stuff to it.
Yeah, I think if you had more space to work with, having like whatever the ending, whoever did it, having some sort of unique screen based on who the person was, that would be a really nice extra.
Yeah, or just straight up extra dialogue, maybe dialogue options as well.
Yeah, more dialogue, more systems. I was thinking about lots of different ways that murders could play out. There's a lot of room to go in to expand.
Aren't you? You were talking before. Aren't you kind of like at the ceiling for what you can get away with realistic EXO?
There are some things that I could do to make this a little bit more elaborate, but I think that what I would do is treat this as a prototype, like a sketch of a game, and then just program it in a more traditional way with SDL or something.
Nice.
We need if at the end, instead of a fight, sometimes they try to seduce you, or they have a different scenario. So it's like a range of.
You can there are separate sprites with separate animations for fencing all of the different opponents.
Oh wow!
If you hit 2 on the title screen, there's a little Easter egg. You can jump straight to the sword fight if you want to have another go at it.
Those neck stabs.
Yeah.
It'd be neat if like almost for this mini game, like it starts out harder, but in your exploration of the rooms, you might get like a better sword. You might get stuff that equips yourself up. The idea that like you're building up in these different systems where like the more exploration you do, they all kind of supportively help you towards the end of the detective work.
Yeah, I definitely want there to be more surprises to it. The main thing that I was going for with this was how in Oregon Trail, you spend the whole thing doing this kind of sedate adventure game, and then it ends with an action sequence.
Yeah, the boat.
I always thought that was great, where it just like throws you a curveball. So I wanted to do. It's not as well executed as that, but it's the same idea. I think it kind of works.
I think it works quite well, honestly. It's definitely a cool sequence. I definitely think it's worth going to a next version for. This seems like a really solid baseline, and I think one of the problems that you can get run into with this type of game is that you make it too messy, like too complicated for people to even figure out what needs to be done. And I think
Right.
you already hit a good space of like it becomes pretty immediately like, other than a little bit of like, for you to be like to make sure people know going into the end sequence that like you do need this information or it's going to be a failure.
Right.
That would probably be the biggest thing.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's pretty much everything for this game.
Let's
Well,
move
I
on
did
to.
just want to say,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
really interesting to see what the limits are of exochip, because a lot of the time people use exochip, they just crank the cycles per frame and that kind of thing. But it's quite interesting as what are the real limitations of exochip, because you were very cautious about what you added to the instruction set, and I think this is a very nice example of what that might look like.
And in terms of like a breakdown of code and everything, this whole thing is somewhere around 40 kilobytes, and about half of that is just the dialogue. And so usually the way that stuff gets used is tons and tons of graphics, and then a small amount of code, and a little bit of other miscellaneous data. But in this case, this game is like so much text. I wrote a bunch of separate tools to help me prepare all of the text for it.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious how that works out
in the source code.
I'm surprised it's that much text, like 20 kilobytes of text. Depending on how it's structured.
I mean, there's different quips that all the NPCs make.
Well, I mean, in terms of like displaying the text, like I don't know, like if you store text based on like, I don't know how you're actually drawing the text.
It's stored in a format that makes it convenient for me to display it on the screen. So like rather than having it be automatically wrapped, which would involve a lot of complexity in the code, it's all baked down into like put this letter at this position on the screen.
I see. Okay, I see. That's why.
So it's in general my most limited resource code space. And I had way more data space than I really needed. So I made a bunch of trade-offs that were economizing on the amount of code that I had, and pushing the complexity into the data.
Gotcha.
I've been there too.
All right, let's move on to Golf by Buffy. Wait a minute.
This is a real standout.
Hang on. There we go. Golf by Buffy.
What a realistic golf ball.
Pretty good.
Let me load up the instructions page real quick. Oh, very, very.
It's pretty intuitive.
I see. Oh, good.
Not
That ended up working out.
Yeah. So this is a mini golf game written by Buffy, who's a returning champion. So the main thing about this that is a little bit surprising mechanically is that there isn't like a force meter or anything to the game. Your ball will basically roll for a specific amount of time after you hit it. So it isn't really based on the number of bounces. But aside from that, the collision is great. The level design gets quite clever. You'll see when you get there. The way that it's implemented, the levels are described in a compact notation where it's, rather than storing like a bitmap of the whole level or anything like that, it is represented as a series of like draw a horizontal line, draw a vertical line, draw a diagonal line. So the amount of space that they take up is based on the complexity.
Yeah.
Hole in one.
Very nice.
So are some of these impossible to get a hole in one on?
This is where the level design starts to get kind of clever, because John saw right through the ruse here, obviously, but or did he?
No, I got it. It's just
yeah. The level is toroidal, So it can be a little bit surprising how things connect to one another.
I just realized that it's doing the
No.
desert golf thing of like having all of your shots just kind of be counted up
Hmm.
over a
So,
series of holes.
so I think that the way that this game makes use of the toroidal wrapping in order to make the levels more complex and confusing is brilliant, and it really makes the game shine. On the technical side of things, this is a classic Chip 8 game. It's using the stock instruction set and the stock resolution. But the way that it's doing its movement and collision computations for the ball is actually somewhat computationally intensive. So unfortunately, this is actually running at 500 cycles per frame, which is actually clocked faster than an Evening to Die For is. And it would be basically unplayable at a realistic speed.
Yeah, that's surprising, kind of.
I think that it
So
would
remind
be
me, like,
possible.
what's the hardware cycle? Like the cycles.
So a realistic emulation speed is something closer to 10 to 15 cycles per frame at 60 FPS, and so this is 500. So about 50 times the speed of the real hardware.
Yeah, what we've generally found is that mathematical operations tend to do better than graphical operations.
That's true.
So
And in the original Chip 8, there was a kind of weird property where basically every time you drew a sprite, which is the only instruction that puts something on the screen. Every time you draw a sprite, it waits for v blank. So essentially, the more sprites you have, the lower your effective frame rate becomes. And also, it was a very expensive operation that was complex for the interpreter. I think you're going to want to do that at an angle.
No.
I was definitely happy that Buffy switched from just using the default color scheme to having some green in there. It really makes it feel more like golf.
Yeah, that's the grass. It's perfect.
There's something really satisfying about just, picking the 2 or 3 colors and trying to give your game a little bit of character with that little, authorial decision.
like honestly, sometimes I pick colors and then I feel like I'm stuck with them. Like I never want to change them after that point. It never looks right.
Just because you get used to them.
Damn.
Yeah.
Before desert. This is very much reminding me of desert golf.
In the sense that your blood pressure is slowly rising.
No, I'm like, I think I've played enough desert golf that it doesn't concern me.
I would also say that if you're somebody who's interested in these competitions.
Sorry, go ahead.
If you're somebody who's interested in these competitions from just the programming side of them, I would recommend that you take a look at the source code to this game. It's very nicely formatted, extensively commented, and Buffy makes a really good use of Octo's macro facilities in order to eliminate repetitive code and make things clear. So definitely check that out if you're interested.
How hard do you think it would have been to implement a power meter, essentially? Because that feels like it would be a really big deal. Increasing both
deeply enjoy the fact that there isn't a power meter because it's making you focus on more of the level design and not on how hard you're hitting your shot. And also, it seems like Buffy's incorporated the fact that you have a set amount of distance you have to roll into the puzzle design of a lot of these levels, where you'll end up using the backboard to kind of burn off a little bit of power. It's
definitely like a thoughtfully designed set of levels, which is like the mechanics are very simple.
Oh wow, the power, your aiming reticle actually does wrap around as well.
Yep.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
Like you
In Octo, everything just naturally does that, and I'm always entertained when games come up with ways to take advantage of that for something. Like a lot of times, the default is that it's a little bit annoying for a programmer, but if you can take advantage of it, then you get this sort of fun effect.
Yeah, I think what I would for a power meter concept, I'd like to see maybe like this is normal hit, then there's a soft and a hard.
Like just
there's three.
discretize it.
Yeah, just make it to like you don't have super control, like finite control, so it's not really easy for the very close putting. But like for right now, there seems to be no way to get holes in one for most of these holes. The distance you have to cover is way too much.
I think there actually is for a lot of them. If you kind of,
I'm just saying that if you can't do it for every hole, that's kind of like that is one of the core things of mini golf. I feel like it's like very rare that you don't have some ability to get a hole in one.
I don't know. Kirby's Dream Course would say otherwise.
That's not really mini golf though. That's Kirby.
It's the ultimate mini
monster.
Hey.
Ooh.
Very nice. 73.
74.
Nice.
I didn't even realize that was one. Well done.
Excellent.
It's an excellent twist ending there, Buffy.
Yeah.
So,
I would like to... Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's really interesting to watch how it's moving the ball around. I don't know if you saw, but it kind of almost hung when the ball came horizontally in line with something.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a lot of little questions that I would like to ask the code of this game as to how it works. So it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, I'm interested because mini golf is all about the reflection of like how a bang shot goes off. And it's like because they're math lines. I'm interested to see how that's approached. The math that goes into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually like you were saying, like with the doing variable strength hits. That's actually where it gets really kind of complicated. Because then you start have to messing around with sub-pixels and all this kind of stuff.
That's true.
And I suspect there may be some avoidance of that. Like I talked to Buffy a little bit about it and suggested, maybe we could use the delay register to make it look like it's slowing down even when it isn't. You just wait longer between frames to make it look like it is. And I don't know how deep that goes, but I'm really quite fascinated by that one.
I think the one thing, I don't know how jam-packed the code for this is, but the idea of doing another version, there's like a little bit more with like mini golf with obstacles, adventure golf sort of concept. Because
I think it would be possible to do something. This game leaves about a kilobyte free in code space. So with some winnowing, maybe removing a couple it would probably be possible to incorporate mechanics like that.
All right, our next game here is Pizza Topping Panic by Tamar.
Right. Tamar is, as usual, our most prolific submitter. I think that this game looks just friggin' great. Everything about the pixel work in it and the layout and animations, you'll see. So the idea in this game is you're tasked with deciding which of these pizzas is better, and then the game decides objectively whether you.
Oh, I love that little text scroll off effect.
Rubbish.
So the way that it's doing the splendid part is it's, of course, just erasing each letter in turn. The way that this game accomplishes its scrolling of elements is taking advantage of functionality that's part of Exochip, even though it doesn't look like it is. So this whole game is black and white. But
wow. You suck, loser.
So in Exochip, you have two graphics planes. You can think of them as just bitmap displays that are laid right on top of one another.
Oh, and you are
joking.
Yeah,
so normally you have one color for one plane and one color for another plane, and then a color when they're overlapping, and that's how you get 4 different colors in addition to the neutral background color. But if you make the two planes have the same color, you can you can make it less clear what elements are on what plane, and the scroll instructions can be applied to just one plane at a time. So if you draw text on one plane and then have a background on a different plane, you can very easily and inexpensively scroll elements off the screen or relative to one another. So like this ending here, it has a fixed background that is no one is pleased, and is using the second graphics plane to draw you suck loser.
That is so clever. I really like that.
What a cool visual.
It's the way that graphic planes are implemented makes it possible to do a lot of really interesting things when you do unusual things with the palettes. Like you can do something like what this is doing to totally obscure the fact that they're separate planes. You can make it so that the combined color is the same as one of the plane colors, so that you can have simulated opacity instead of sort of simulated translucency.
I wonder what its metrics are for what pizza's better.
Its metrics are a random number generator, I'm afraid.
Oh no!
This game is completely unwinnable, which is very realistic.
Moving on to... Yeah, we're just going to seamlessly move on to Tomar's next game. We can continue talking about this because this is just kind of a graphical thing.
This was not so much a game as a fun little program. Tom was just playing around with visuals. It's a non-interactive demo. Several of us were trying to convince him to try to flesh it out into some sort of a Ghostbusters themed game. I do hope that maybe he'll pick this up, play with it again next year.
All right, you want to just move right along to Dump Trump.
Sure thing. So I guess this, in our 6th year, is when Octo Jam finally gets political. It's inevitable.
This is difficult.
Yeah, so this is basically, those Flash games that usually involve brutally mauling a penguin or something, and then trying to get it to bounce. It's the same sort of.
So this is extremely Nanako Crash too.
Yeah, it's the same sort of idea with noted comedian and celebrity Donald Trump.
Are those cookies on the ground and beer?
There are a variety of different objects. There are shit heaps and dumpster fires and
is there
apparently German flags. I'm not sure I quite get on.
I think
maybe it was just the color scheme.
Is there like a kitten cannon sort of aspect where where you can keep them bouncing? That seems to be what he's going for here.
Yeah, I don't think it actually matters what you land on, which is a little. If it actually
like
had
half of the game concept there.
Yeah, I definitely think it would have been more complete if they had that. Although, I mean, at the end of the day, mechanically, it doesn't matter that much because it's still just randomness once you choose your angle and power. So this game is using obviously the exochip graphics planes in a more straightforward way, where it's using them to get 4-color graphics.
So you choose it at the same time then?
Yeah, it's got the 2 meters that are going at different speeds, and then you just hit the button. And I think that John managed to get the absolute worst.
Yeah, and this one's pretty good.
Yeah,
I wish it didn't.
Maybe like a little. I like the concept of a home run contest, but with Trump's head. Pretty entertaining.
You're definitely having some sort of additional play out for the items on the ground would be a big help of what they do if they summon up another power angle sort of thing, like someone else hitting them.
I think I played a version of this sort of thing where you were like a penguin being slammed by a yeti, and some sort of ability to fart or something to kind of exercise a little bit more nuanced control. Just if you or there was
there's one
like the popular PlayStation 3 game Pain. You had the oonch to sort of finesse yourself a little bit while you're flying through the air. I think that just in this type of game, having some limited resource that the user has to continue influencing how they're doing makes a
Yeah.
big difference on how fun the game is.
But yeah, moving on. This is good
Okay.
fun, but falling.
So falling is the other submission verisimilitude, and this has the distinction of being by far the smallest submission that we've ever gotten. This whole game is 40 bytes. Um, so what it does is it'll show a number on the screen and it starts falling down, and you have to hit that key on the chip 8 keypad before it hits the ground, and then you'll get another key, and you try to go as long as you can. So it's really difficult unless you have memorized chip 8 keypad. But once you have, it feels like about the right amount of challenge. And like I said, on a purely technical level, this is really impressive because it's a relatively unique game design in an extremely small amount of space. And this is using stock chip 8 instruction set. It's running at a realistic speed, and it's this tiny little gem of a game. So while it's not as elaborate and impressive as this year, I think that it's really, really neat. And like the Rule 30 implementation that this author provided, there's an extensive write-up on how this game fits together on his website that's linked in the description. Definitely check this out if you're interested in the programming side.
Right, yeah.
Very
Really
cool.
interested to see if they use the same thing to draw the character as to check which character you've pushed. I suspect they probably do.
So you said that you could have two using two of the layers for variant scrolling. Would you be able to have, say, if you wanted to have more than one letter at a time, more than one symbol to be pressed
So
at a
if
time?
you did this using ExoChip, it would be possible to do a trick like that. But this program is just using stock chip 8,
Oh,
which
okay.
means it doesn't even have scroll instructions. Those were introduced in
Damn.
Superchip on the HP48. So this is purely erasing and redrawing, which is probably part of the reason why there's just one number.
Yeah, that makes sense then.
And I believe there would have been a reset button on the Cosmac, so you
Right.
didn't need to have the reset button on the keypad.
Mhm.
The difficulty doesn't seem to be increasing, and I'm slowly memorizing the keypad. So I think this
It's
is
only 40
I'm
bytes.
I'm only gonna get better.
Uh-huh.
Are you
I'm gonna let- I'm
clicking
gonna-
or are you?
I'm clicking. I'm just gonna let it go. All right, that's falling. The next game we got here is the Root Street, and that's by System Logoff.
Oh, I hope it isn't too rude.
Whoa, it's running very fast.
So this is a super chip game. You can tell because it's somewhat higher resolution than the chip 8 games. And the idea is simply that you're walking down a windy street and trying not to slam into passerby rudely.
That's cheating.
One thing about this game, though, is that it's not running at realistic frame rate. And if you actually want to see a little bit more about how this is implemented, John, if you could stop the game and change the speed to the minimum of 7 cycles per frame.
I cannot.
Oh, you're running this in the...
Yeah, it's running just straight off the embed.
Fine. So if you were to slow it down, what you would see is that it's actually repainting the entire display on every frame.
Oh, wow.
Which
Oh,
is
really?
part of why it needs to run at the current frame rate.
Unless I can go into the header, if you're storing that in the header somewhere.
It's in, yeah, it's so whenever you do one of these embeds, the source code to the Octo program is stored immediately followed by a JSON object that contains all of the settings.
What's the key for finding the?
It should be. Good question.
Or cycle.
I think it'll be at the end though. This is the program at the beginning.
All of the relevant.
Scale factor.
Might be tick rate.
Yeah, tick rate.
Hey, so 7. Let's
Right.
Hang on. It is HTML. Oh my goodness. Okay. How did they make this even more frustrating to use?
Oh boy.
This is why generally using Octo itself for doing this debugging stuff is a lot
I give up.
nicer than
I'm
trying
giving
to
up.
live edit the embed.
Pressing W will stop the game. I don't know if that's intended or not. Because then you can just kind of like, when you see him coming for you real quick, you just stop and then you can move
I
yourself.
believe that is an intentional feature. You're using your mental powers of stopping time.
Congratulations, Sean. You've beaten the game.
You just look at that passerby and say no.
He seems
for all the bullets.
to jiggle a bit.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm-
jiggling.
What's
I mean,
quite
don't you?
interesting about that is if you were actually playing this on an HP48, you probably wouldn't see that because the LCD refresh is so slow.
Well, the
Actually,
the problem is that on an HP 48, you're probably lucky if you can do 40 cycles per frame, and this
yeah.
game is clocked at 500.
It
Right.
seems also
You may be right.
the passerby is determined, like they're doing the movement based on the key you're holding. So if you just hold D against the wall here, this will continue to happen for eternity because he's not going to move.
Mm.
I let go of D,
Wait.
you'll see he'll start moving again, I think.
Yeah.
Or maybe not.
Just doesn't
It's
want to be rude.
The
it's
neat,
a
very,
little strange.
it's a neat concept for a game though. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I played a version that didn't have the wind implemented. And the strategy was to hug that wall and then just hands off the controls. But by holding the button down, I believe you have, in fact, defeated even that.
It looks like when the wind direction it's drawing the indicator on top of itself and erasing part of it. And you notice that earlier it was sort of a very
Oh.
strange symbol.
Yeah, that's what happened. Oh dear.
Oh, it finally updated. I was hands off the keyboard for a while.
Yeah, that's how it'll get you.
So what happens when
think
it goes up to 999 to 1,000? Well,
That's
How
what
will
we're
that
going to find
update?
out here.
That's a very good question.
We're going for the world record.
So I do think that there is room, if this game was optimized, to get this working on an HP 48. And I would really
I
like
would
to
say
see
so.
that. But I know that System Logoff sort of ran out of time to work on this. And so it was a little bit rushed at the end. And that's probably part of why it does kind of an unnecessarily inefficient re-rendering the whole screen.
Yeah, I think this could work.
Oh, of course. I mean, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
What
of
happens when you
course.
get to FFF?
We're not going to find out because our next game is Duel of the F8s. Eights.
So this is
yeah,
Master
fate.
Goffrin's unfinished game, as it
Yes.
Prepare
Oh,
for
look at the
this.
on-screen key prompts.
Nice.
that is
Yeah.
actually a really nice
Incredible.
touch.
So a bit like IJ, I was interested in making a more of an experience. And part of that experience was a very important story.
Whoa!
Whoa.
It looks really friggin' cool. Parts that you finished are so
Yeah.
exciting.
So there is some control.
Yo.
It's 2, 3, E, S and D.
It's basically like an animation tab.
It looks really good.
It does.
Yeah, I was really interested.
Oh, look
to
at the
see-
swipes.
Really good.
Yeah, I was really interested to see what I could get away with for Exo Chip because I've never done an Exo Chip game, and I've had this idea in the back of my head for a while about, like, iconically, like you start off with silhouettes and then you bring in those extra colors, just like
Raise the
An
roof.
Evening to Die For. And the best example of that is lightsabers, I thought.
Yeah, I think that works incredibly well. You have to do some more work on this next year, please.
I do.
Make
How
this
much?
I'm
a
thinking
finish.
about
How much?
doing it pretty soon.
Because it looks like the index.html for this is quite large. It's 147 kilobytes. How much ROM space are you using for the sprites here?
So it's at this time it is mostly sprites, and it's gonna just become more sprites. So I worked out that there was so basically you have 5 directions that you can move your saber into, and then there's facing towards the camera and facing away from the camera, which you can just about sort of tell. But if you look at your feet, they change from one side to the other.
And there's
Right.
you're also blending between each state,
Yes,
depending on the
there's
key
2
you
frames
press, which I
between
was
each one.
really impressed by.
It's beautiful.
There's 5 states, 2 frames between each one, and then forwards and backwards. So that's 5 times 20, I think it ends up being. So it's about 100 frames of just this. And I was doing a lot of kind of calculations. Where can I save memory in order to fit enough animations in? Because this is just the player character. This is just one half of the situation. Like, I need the other half, and that probably has to be even more animated. Because I worked on the idea that if you want to put, like, when you decide something, it has to sort of happen very quickly. So 2 animation frames between it makes about sense. But if you're trying to, like, signpost an attack that you have to defend against, that's got to be longer than 2 animation frames, or it's just going to hit you in the head.
Right.
So I tried to trim out as much detail as I can. So the only part that really is any different is where the arms and the lightsaber is. And so the rest of it is just the same thing over and over again. So
I actually had a problem that was very similar to that in
Windshield
An
wipers.
Evening to Die For in the fencing minigame. Like, there's actually an
Right.
additional frame of animation in my case for a tell before they attack. The player doesn't give a tell frame, but the opponent does, so that you have some chance of trying to block. I think, like, obviously the solution is that we should figure out how to just, like, glue our games together into one big pile.
yeah, maybe, yeah.
It could actually, that could conceivably work. Aside from this space limitations, might be a challenge.
So are
Yeah.
the space limitations just kind of suggestions, or are they super hard enforced by the emulator?
So the 64 kilobyte limit is a hard inherent limit because of the address space that the machine has.
Yeah.
So there's the code that is in the lowest 4 kilobytes is sort of specially privileged because all of the instructions that have to do, like, with doing a subroutine call or a branch only allow you to specify a 12-bit address. So that means you can jump and subroutine call anywhere you want in the low 4 kilobytes. And then the rest of RAM I usually refer to as data RAM, because you can set the index pointer to any of those locations, and so you can draw graphics from it or you can load data from it. But you can't really put code there except in some sort of contorted edge cases when you want to be clever. So in general, you've got 3.5 kilobytes of usable space for your program, and then 60 kilobytes of usable space for anything else, any other data structures you want.
Interesting.
Yeah. So in a hardware environment, there are things that you might have depending on how that RAM is accessed. You might have, like, a bank register that you could flip that might give you more memory space.
Mhm.
Additionally, you could have, like, a loading screen where it erases all of the original code and it just shifts to a completely different game by loading a different chunk of memory, that data memory, into your program space.
Mhm.
So conceivably, you can have, provided they don't need to talk to each other very much, a whole other program somewhere in that high memory that you just sneak in.
Right. And there have been a couple of games made in jams where they took advantage of a feature that the HP48 had, which are called flag registers, where it's 8 bytes of persistent data across program runs. So it is possible to have like one chip 8 program that does a bunch of stuff. Any state that you want to save between programs, you put in the flag registers, and then you load in another program. Ordinarily, it would be used for something like a high score, and a number of games have done that before. But in principle, you could use it to make multi-cart games.
It's kind of like the concept of like ROM banks for like a Super Nintendo or an
Yeah.
NES would do.
When I was originally designing the Exochip extensions, which is what brought you from a 4 kilobyte limit to a 64 kilobyte limit, I considered doing bank switching, but there are a bunch of really ugly trade-offs in the way that your code ends up being once you start using bank switching. It's really difficult to take advantage of, and it makes your programs a lot more contorted. So I went with an extension mechanism that just sort of gave you the ability to load a 16-bit address into the index register, and it keeps the programming model very simple and consistent.
Anything stopping you from extending the extension?
Not strictly, but I mean, having the creative constraints to work within is a big part of the fun.
Mm-hmm.
So, with more time to think about it, I'm sure that there will always be new opportunities for cramming more into that amount of space. I've got some pretty big ideas for making something even more elaborate next year, and we'll see how far I get on that.
All right, we're gonna move on to the. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I was pretty comfortable with the amount of memory I had. The main reason I worked to fit this guy into as little as possible is honestly just so I could be lazy with the rest of it, because I knew I was going to run out of time.
Right.
I really did run out of time. But I just wanted to be like, okay, slam in 100 animations. I can just dump onto the screen and then be done, Mm-hmm. Because I knew that would be much more sequenced. Like what he does is going to be much more fixed and structured, whereas what the player character does has to be whatever you do when you click your buttons.
Right.
So I figured that would be the best place to try and, sneak in a little bit of memory saving.
Yeah, you can have much less flexible sequences for enemies because they're always going to attack in stereotypical way.
So the memory limit does exist, but I don't think we've really pushed the limits too much of it still, even now. Like, it's the code space more than anything that we tend to bump into.
Mm-hmm.
But there are things you can do.
Right.
All right. So the final game we got here is Patrick's Chip 8 Challenge.
Okay, this was the second submission from Tobias. And so this is an adaptation of an existing abstract puzzle game. I think Tobias has done implementations of it before. So the idea in this game is you're trying to X out every square on the grid. But if you go on one of the squares that has dots on it, those represent, when you step on this, it's going to get those neighboring squares X'd out. And you can't step on a square a second time. So they're sort of like traps that you have to make sure that you're leaving yourself a way to keep moving, or you'll be completing the board. It's actually a really interesting little puzzle mechanic. The one problem is that this was another game that was finished at sort of the last minute, and so he elected to go with randomized.
And there's like levels you can't beat, it looks like.
Yeah, many of the levels are. So in the other versions of this style of game that I've seen before. That actually might
Got
work.
this,
John.
John. Yeah, you've
Yeah,
got
you
it.
got it. You got it.
Yeah, you got it. Nice.
Well done.
I like
I was
the
hoping
puzzle
the game would
concept.
just end.
Yeah, but in any other versions of this puzzle game that have been made, it's usually been canned levels, and that's a little bit less frustrating. But this is one of the other games done using historically accurate chip 8 limitation. So it runs at a realistic speed. Again, hitting the speed goals is a lot easier to do if you go for some kind of a turn-based puzzle game than trying to do an action game.
Did you move diagonally?
That's cheating.
You can move diagonally.
Oh, that's a.
It kind of changes everything
everything,
about
John.
it. I know, it's so mind-blowing to be able to move in 8 directions.
It's too advanced.
I can only imagine what my day-to-day life would be like if I could move in all directions.
Honestly, one of the things I always like are games that make use of that 16-button input that we have.
Right.
The puzzle.
Yeah. Oh, you do.
So this doesn't use all 16 buttons, but it's definitely using an unusual scheme that's fairly well suited to the arrangement of keys that we have available. So even though getting an unsolvable can make this game frustrating, I think it's definitely a fun puzzle mechanic, and this is a decent implementation of it.
Yeah, thinking about it, with the diagonals and also the fact that a lot of the 6 dot ones are pretty easily taken out by neighboring ones. I feel like it's more solvable than you would expect having random. Like there's probably a fair number. It would probably be pretty rare that you actually get one that's totally unbeatable with those extra conditions.
Right.
Oh, and you can sometimes see a single pixel of it detecting how things work, I think, when you move.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
This is very enjoyable.
Yeah, this is
Oh
neat.
boy, look at this one.
So overall, that's all of the games that we got this year. Things were a little bit different in this year's competition because we've moved to using itch.io, and hopefully that'll make people's game submissions a little bit more accessible to a broader audience in the future. We're definitely going to be doing this again next year. So thanks to everybody who participated. I hope you had fun and learned some stuff. And see you all around again next October.
Yeah, this is excellent. Thanks for everybody who jumped in.
Great work, folks.
Yeah, it's been really good.